welcome everybody. Good morning, church. Good morning, guests, and everybody who's here today. We appreciate you worshiping with us. This morning we are beginning chapter 6 of Ecclesiastes. And like chapter 5 before it, it's a rather depressing read. And again, I want to remind you that this is the point. It's supposed to be. We live in a fallen world. We are flooded with temptations, and we are continually led and pushed down paths that will not offer satisfaction that's promised. We're all victims of the great advertiser, and we'd be absolutely helpless to see through his deceptions if it wasn't for people like Solomon in the Book of Ecclesiastes. Solomon is essentially asking us, are you living or are you existing? There is, in fact, life out there, but you won't find it by listening to the world. And if I'm being honest, I never expected this book to be this difficult to preach through. It's depressing, it's gut-wrenching, it's convicting, it's harsh. But again, that's the point. Now, this morning, we come to the end of Solomon's first main point. 9 times so far in the book of Ecclesiastes, we have read the phrase, striving after wind. The final time is here at the end of verse 9. And it's a statement which speaks to a man pursuing things that he can never catch and never hold. A treasure that we can never hold. A dream that can never be reality. And ultimately, the thing Solomon was striving for was satisfaction or true life. That's what he sought. And as he searched and he listened to the world's advice, he realized it didn't work. Solomon is telling us that what the world offered was bad advice. And while he has used the phrase striving after wind 9 times, it actually refers to 4 empty promises. So I'm going to shrink the book down a little bit for you here to help you see the main point that he's made over these first 6 chapters. It might be a little bit of a review. But the first 2 times that Solomon used the phrase striving after wind was in chapter 1, verses 14, verses 17. And it's when he was talking about the futility of wisdom. He said in chapter 1, verses 12 through 18, he says, I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I applied my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me. And my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is but a striving after wind. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. If you remember, Solomon was talking about how he was promised that if he could simply get wisdom, simply get knowledge, that he would have the secret to prosperity and satisfaction in life. Everything would be good. It didn't work. He obtained knowledge and it didn't fix anything. In fact, he says in verse 15, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. What he's saying in that verse is that all the knowledge in the world couldn't fix his depravity and his deficiency. Those are the 2 things he's talking about when he says made straight or be counted. Knowledge never makes somebody perfect. Consider the Apostle Paul how the more he learned about the law, he was a Pharisee. The more he learned about the law, the more he realized just how much of a sinner he was. Even Bible knowledge won't make you a better person. The Holy Spirit does that. Maybe that's why people don't like to open their Bibles and read them. In verse 18 of that passage I just read, he said, because in much wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. So how do we avoid grief and pain? We don't get wisdom. We don't open the Bible and read. That was Solomon's first busted myth. The world doesn't provide that wisdom and knowledge. To pursue knowledge as a means to life is a striving after wind. It's an unobtainable dream. And then Solomon moved on to his next major myth. He said, the futility of pleasure. And in the next 3 times he uses the phrase striving after wind is in chapter 2, verses 11, 17, and 26. And he says in chapter 2, verses 9 through 11, so I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure. For my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind. And there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Remember in chapter, he tried the 4 W's. He tried wine and works and wealth and women. He experienced all of that to an infinite degree, it seemed. And yet there was no satisfaction there. There was only frustration and boredom. So much so that he said in verse 17, so I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. That was his point in chapter 2. Pursuing pleasure to obtain satisfaction is a myth. It's an unobtainable dream. And now at this point in the book, Solomon did pause for a minute, and he gave us a warning. And after the first 2 myths, Solomon pauses and he says, don't waste your life. And that was chapter 3. Chapter 3 is that famous verse we looked at a couple weeks ago where he paused in his review long enough to remind us that there is an appropriate response in everything that God ordains. Don't respond inappropriately to this life because death is coming and judgment will follow. He's telling us that we only have a small amount of time on this earth, so use it wisely. Use it appropriately. And then after that warning, Solomon returned to his myth-busting. And he started speaking of the 3rd myth that the world advertises. And he's talking about the futility of accomplishment. And that was found in chapter 4. And 3 times in that chapter, he uses the phrase striving after wind. Verse 4, verse 6, and verse 16. The chapter showed us a man who had worked his whole life to accomplish something that in the end wasn't worth it. He said in verses 4 through 6 of that chapter, then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and a striving after wind. And remember how he spoke of how even though rest is to be desired, a man can't afford to do it because if he does, the world is so competitive that his competitors will put him out of business. He'll fall too far behind. And so people literally push one another to exhaustion, trying to reach goals in this rat race of accomplishment. And yet, despite their efforts, people still end up getting kicked to the curb, replaced, forgotten. He told the story of a king, if you recall. It was a corrupt king. And so the people turned on him, and they wanted a new king. So they chose this poor young guy, and they made him the king and gave him that honor. But it wasn't too long before they got tired of him too, and they wanted somebody else. Kicked him to the curb. He said in chapter 4, verse 16, there was no end of all the people, all of whom he led, yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and a striving after wind. Solomon says, you are often promised that if you work hard and accomplish things, then you'll find satisfaction. But that just isn't true. The world doesn't care about your accomplishments. Give the world enough time and they will tear down your statues too. And they'll take down your records that you have on school walls for whatever sport you participated in, that you were excelled at, or anywhere. We will all be forgotten at some point. Now, those were the first three myths that he busted. And the final myth is listed here in chapter 6. We already started talking about a little bit last week when Solomon was talking about chapter 5, the acquiring, or the futility of acquiring treasure. If you remember last week, if you were here, you remember that we first talked about the ills of pursuing money, and then towards the end we talked about the threats that come if you have money. There was 6 things. There was corruption, if you recall, and Solomon addressed that in verse 8 of chapter 5 last week. He says, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violence of justice and righteousness, or violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. Saying it's expected. Don't be surprised when you see corruption and the governments and people in authority doing wrong things, trying to take your money. That's corruption. And then he says, you'll have dissatisfaction if you have money. He said in verse 10, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. And then he says, you'll also become frustrated. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? In verse 11. And he says, you'll worry about it. If you have money, you'll worry about trying to keep it. In verse 12, he says, sweet is the sleep of the laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. If you have money, you can't sleep because you're worrying about the stock market. You're worrying about your investments. You're worrying about it getting stolen. And then the 5th thing was uncertainty. He says in verse 13 and 14, there is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. There's nothing to pass down as an inheritance to anybody because he lost it all. His wealth was an uncertainty. And then the 6th thing was the worst of all of them. It was loss. And he said in verse 15 last week, as we looked at, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. He's saying we're all going to die and you can't take anything with you. All of those things, those 6 things, pointed to the fact that obtaining treasure does not bring satisfaction. Instead, it brings a whole list of other problems. Well, this morning, Solomon finishes that thought going into chapter 6. And he clearly sees the problem. And it's found here in the first 9 verses of chapter 6. So let's finally get into the text and read the first 2 verses of chapter 6. Solomon wrote, there is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. What is this evil Solomon's talking about? It's that here we have a man who God has given riches. He's enabled this man to acquire the treasure that he pursued. He got the salary that he wanted. He built the house that he wanted. He drives the car that he wanted. He has everything. His retirement is secure. He made it. But now he'll face all those problems that Solomon listed in chapter 5. The corrupt leaders will try to take it. Advertising will show him that there's still more that he needs. Friends are going to try to borrow it. Inflation is going to devalue it, and he's going to worry about that. Tragedy and disaster may very well come and wipe it away, and eventually he'll die and have to leave it, whatever's left. So even though he finally got all that he desired, he found out the cold, hard truth that there is no satisfaction in those things. God gave wealth possessions and honor so that he lacked nothing of all that he desires. Yet God didn't give him power to enjoy it all. And Solomon says this is not only common, but this is vanity. It's a grievous evil. People who scratch and claw and work their whole life for something, and even when they obtain it, they either find no satisfaction in it or they can't enjoy it. And Solomon has a sobering comparison for us here about just how awful this tragedy is. Listen to what he says in verse 3. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. Did you hear that? A person who gets what they wanted. They obtain their goals. They live many years, have many children. That sounds like a pretty good deal for most of us, doesn't it? But they find that there's still no satisfaction in life. It's misery. And Solomon says a stillborn child is better off than that person. That's harsh stuff, folks. Why would he say that? Let's give Solomon a chance to explain. Look what he says in verses 4 and 5. He says, "For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness," it being the stillborn child. "And in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he." He being the man who accumulated all the wealth and had everything, and then all the disappointment. So what's his point? Is that the child that dies before birth has an advantage over the man who obtains the world but finds no satisfaction. Why? Why would he have an advantage? Because at least the child doesn't know the pain and the struggle and such disappointment. According to Solomon, there's a greater suffering to be found in the realization that your labor and striving wasn't worth it. The suffering is so bad that you'd be better off to have never known it or experienced it. And I tried to think of a microcosm or an example, an illustration to put to this morning. And it's not a perfect microcosm, but I started thinking about the Christmas gift exchange. I don't know about your families or how you do exchange gifts in your family. My family does the white elephant gift exchange thing, where everybody gathers and you can put anything in a box. It can be junk, it can be a real good present. But you wrap it up and you stick it under the tree with no name on it, and everybody draws numbers. And the person who draws number 1 gets to go first, and they pick a present of their choice, open it up, and that's theirs. Now, number 2 has the option of taking that gift or picking one from under the tree. And so it goes down the line for everybody who has a number. At some point, gifts start moving around because people see things that they want instead of picking a gift that's under the tree. And those gifts, they can switch. In our family, we limited it to 3 times. Once the gift moves the 3rd time, then it was stuck. The person who got it got to keep it. Well, one of my first years married, we were in the family together. We were doing the gift exchange, and I got to pick. I wasn't first. I was towards the beginning, though, and the gift that I picked was a box of Craftsman socket sets, a small box of Craftsman socket sets. Now, I'm a young guy. We were living in an apartment. I didn't have a garage, but as you start building up your tools, you start accumulating things, and I'm like, man, this is cool. This was great for me. It wasn't a perfect gift. It wasn't something I wanted or was seeking, but I'm like, this is great. And a couple gifts exchanges later, my brother-in-law, who's, 12 or 13 at the time, says, I want that. And he took my Craftsman socket sets. Oh, man, what a bummer. So I had the option of taking what somebody else had already opened or picking the next gift under the tree. I didn't see anything else that I wanted, and I couldn't take back the Craftsman because you weren't allowed to do that. That was another rule. So I picked a box from under the tree, and you know what I got? I got a Tupperware bowl. And it didn't have the lid even. It was a used Tupperware bowl. And I couldn't get rid of it because nobody else wanted that. And that was my gift for the exchange that year. I had tasted, yes, this is great. And went to, are you kidding me? This life has an odd way of letting you get what you want, to get a taste of it, but still never let you be satisfied. Solomon continued with verse 6. He says, even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, 2,000 years to live, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place. In other words, even if he gets a really long life, lives 2,000 years, and as compared to a stillborn child who never sees the sun, they both, he's asked, do they not still go to the same place? And the difference is that the stillborn has no disappointment. That baby never knows the grief of the living. But the rich man, he suffered the realization that there is no satisfaction in all that he has acquired. And so Solomon says, in verse 7, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. And that's the summation of life as far as Solomon's concerned. He sums up that we work, we toil, we strive, we push, we compete, and we're still going to be hungry. Solomon's been he's been very consistent. There is temporary joy to be gained from the good things in this life. There are good things in this life. But if you are expecting satisfaction for the soul from this world, forget it. It's not going to happen. Wisdom won't bring it. Pleasure won't bring it. Achievement won't bring it. Treasure won't bring it. Those are all myths. And so here comes his final striving after the wind. And this concludes his first major point. In fact, we are at the midway point of Ecclesiastes. Verse 10 is the actual literal midway point of the book. But he says in verses 8 and 9, for what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of an appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. He compares now the wise man and the fool. Both end up in death, and neither find satisfaction through this life. And he wonders, is there any advantage found to wisdom? And his answer is no, none. It's all just people striving for that which they cannot obtain. And he says, what the eyes see is better than what the soul desires. Ever hear the statement, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush? It means that something concrete and real is better than something that is maybe promised or potential hope. It's even if it's better than what you possess or perceive to be better. Life in this world is like the two birds in a bush. It looks like an opportunity. Advertisements and advice and temptations tell you that there's something out there. Satisfaction can be found. Satan is constantly dangling carrots of satisfaction in front of us, but you'll never hold it. This is also vanity and a striving after wind. So Solomon has now capped off his first main point of the book. These first 6 chapters have been an eye-opening critique, if you will, of the promises of the world. And the world says, get knowledge, get pleasure, accomplish great things, acquire treasure, and you will be satisfied. And Solomon says, no, you're wrong. All those things are striving after wind. None of those things bring life. But listen, and this is important. There's a reason why the world doesn't satisfy. There's a reason. And it's not simply because Satan is a liar. Yes, on one hand, Satan, who is in control of the world right now, yes, on one hand, things never pan out because Satan lies to us and what he offers isn't true. But there's another reason why those things never satisfy. And it is critical for us to understand. This is what Solomon is stressing. We won't find satisfaction in this life, in this world, because God won't let it be that way. Look back at verse 2 in our passage this morning. Verse 2, he says, a man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them. It's God who refuses to allow these things to satisfy. Only God satisfies. Remember all the way back in chapter 2. This was a couple weeks ago. Solomon talked about this. He said in chapter 2, verses 24 through 26, there is nothing better for a person than that he should eat and drink and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw and is from the hand of God. For apart from him who can eat and who can have enjoyment. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Satisfaction is only found in God, or ultimately in his Son, Jesus. And he will not allow the things of this world to satisfy you. And we ask ourselves, why? Why is God so cruel? Why would he be so stingy? Why would he refuse to let the things that we have in this life satisfy us? Because if you could find ultimate satisfaction in the things of this world, then you would never desire God. You'd never chase after him, and he knows this. The objective is to drive us to God. His objective is to drive us to God. Every frustration, every grief, every sorrow, every pain, it's all for one purpose, and that is to get you to forsake this world and trust in God. Run to God. We've read this time and time again in the scriptures. Even on the day, thinking about the Israelites, even on the day when God brought Babylon down on the Israelites, even on the day when life for the Israelites, as they knew it, came crashing down on them, even on that day when they were losing the land that they had obtained, on that day, God reminded them of the point that Solomon makes here. That true life is not about what you know or what you've accomplished or what you've experienced or what you have. That's mere existing. True life is found only in knowing and being in relationship with God. And in that dark hour for the Israelites, in the midst of all that destruction, God had a message for the Israelites. And he passed it through the prophet Jeremiah. Listen to what he says. In Jeremiah 29, he says, for thus says the Lord, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will visit you. And I, keep track of the I's that I say here. And this is God talking through Jeremiah. I will visit you, and I will fulfill to you my promise and bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will hear you. You will seek me and find me, and you will seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and gather you from all the nations and all the places where I have driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from which I sent you into exile. That's the point. Israel had only been out to obtain the world. They knew God. They wanted their own land, though. And they wanted what other nations had. They wanted a king like all the other nations. And like all the other nations, they wanted their high place. They were in that competition, that rat race. They wanted to be the top nation. They knew God, but they were buying the world's lie. And just like Solomon said here, God let them have it. God never let them enjoy it. They had the land, but they never had rest. That was the great illusion. God had promised them a land that flows with milk and honey, a land where they would find rest from their enemies. They got the land, but they never got the rest. Rest and satisfaction were the goal. That's what they get from God. And remember in the very beginning, think about the very beginning, God cursed the ground and told Adam that only by the sweat of his brow would they produce food. And it's not long after that Adam's descendants started lamenting. They started whining and crying about how difficult it was and how there was no rest in the land. And then came along, listen to Noah's dad. Noah who built the ark, not Noah Odell. Noah, his dad, Lamech. Listen to what he says. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah, saying, "This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground which the Lord had cursed." So from Adam to Noah, no rest. And Noah's dad says, my son Noah's going to give us rest. Well, how'd that work out? There was no rest after Noah. Well, thankfully, we had Moses, because Moses comes along and he promises rest. He's going to take them into the promised land. Well, that didn't work out too well either, did it? Plus, there were 40 years walking around the desert. There was no rest in the desert. Thankfully, we got Joshua, though. Joshua, yeah, he's the guy. He's going to take us into the promised land, and he does, right? He takes us into the promised land. Still no rest. How do we know that? Because about 300 years after Joshua, King David, he writes in Psalm 95, "Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in Meribah, as on the day of Massah in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof. Though they had seen my work, for 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are people who go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. Therefore, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest." Israel keeps missing the point. They keep pursuing satisfaction in these worldly things instead of the things of God. And they never found it. God would temporarily allow them to taste it. We get the same thing. God let them live in the land for a while, but ultimately there was no satisfaction. And on the day that God drove them out of the land, he reminded them that I alone know what is good, and I alone have a good plan for you, for your life. This plan of God ultimately revealed itself about 600 years after God made that promise through Jeremiah. A world saw a light that appeared in the darkness. Jesus approached these people who had been allowed to get a good taste of the bitterness of life and the struggles of life. And he said to those people in Matthew chapter 11, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." There you have it, folks. There's true life, but the world doesn't offer it. There is satisfaction, but you can't find it in the world. The world doesn't know what it is. Only in Christ is when we find satisfaction, the rest, the life God has for us. Not just an existence. We don't want to go through life just existing. So I ask you, do you know God? And if you do, are you still buying the lies of the world? Or are you truly in relationship with him? with that, I want to go back to verse 9 for just a second. Chapter 6, verse 9. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. Solomon, he warns us against chasing what never satisfies. And yet, in the Lord's Supper, we are invited to come and fix our eyes on something truly better. Jesus Christ, who satisfies our soul's deepest hunger. As we come to the table this morning, let's lay down our wandering appetites. Let's receive the bread and the cup with grateful hearts. Let's prepare ourselves, center ourselves for what we're about to do. In the Lord's Supper, we find that our eyes were made to see the love of Christ poured out for us. So let us prepare our hearts now and remember him to find rest in the only one who truly satisfies, Jesus Christ. Can I have my ushers come forward again for distributing?